The automatic doors slid open and nobody moved. Not the woman behind the registration glass, not the two clerks bent over their screens, not the security guard leaning against the wall with a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hand. The old man in the wheelchair had been parked beside the entrance for 40 minutes, gray in the face, one hand pressed flat against his chest, and the lobby of Cedar Falls Regional had simply folded around him the way a river folds around a stone. He was a problem. They had decided to wait out. His name was Earl Tibbets, 73 years old, and he had served 2 tours in a war most of the people in that lobby had never bothered to learn the dates of. He had driven himself in. That was the part that would matter later, the part that would make people lower their eyes when they heard it. He had felt the pressure climbing up his left arm at his kitchen table, set down his coffee, and decided he could make the 9 miles into town faster than an ambulance could find his road. He had been right about that. He had been wrong about everything that came after. A man walked through those same doors at 4 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, and beside him walked a dog. If you ever wonder whether one person showing up can change the temperature of a room, stay with this story, because what happened in that lobby over the next hour is the reason a whole town learned the name of a man it had been ignoring for years. Subscribe and stay until the end. You will want to see how it lands. Cole Brennan was 41. He stood a little over 6 feet, built lean and hard through the shoulders the way men get when their strength comes from labor instead of mirrors. And he moved through doorways the way some men never stop moving, with his eyes finding the corners first, the exits, the faces. There was a thin, pale scar along the left side of his jaw, and gray coming in at his temples earlier than his years. Called for, he had been a gunnery sergeant. He did not say so to strangers. He carried it the way he carried everything, quietly, low against the chest. And he had come to Cedar Falls Regional that afternoon for the most ordinary reason a man can have. He needed a tetanus shot. He had torn his hand open on a fence wire 2 days back, fixing a gate for a widow 3 properties down from the place he was renting, and the skin had gone hot and red around the cut. The dog was a German shepherd named Deef. Working line, dark almond eyes, a black saddle laid over a tan body, and a black mask across the muzzle. 80 pounds of disciplined muscle that walked at Cole's left knee without a leash because it had never once needed one. Deef was 7. He wore a plain, worn leather collar and no vest, because Cole had stopped putting the vest on him the day they both came home for good. People saw the vest and asked questions. The collar let them be 2 travelers instead of a story. Deef stopped first. That was the thing Cole noticed before he noticed anything else. 3 steps into the lobby. The dog's weight shifted. His ears came forward, and he turned his whole body toward the old man in the wheelchair by the window. Cole had learned a long time ago not to argue with that turn. Deef did not pull toward strangers. He did not beg, did not wander, did not break the invisible line he held at Cole's knee, unless something in a room had gone wrong in a way the dog could read before the people in it could. Cole followed the dog's eyes. He saw the old man's color. He saw the hand flat against the chest, the slow, shallow rise of breath, the sweat sheeting the forehead in a room that was not warm. He had seen that face on younger men in worse places. The body has only a few ways of telling the truth, and that was one of them. He crossed the lobby. Behind the registration glass, a woman with a lanyard and tired eyes was saying into a phone that she would have to call them back. Her name tag read, Donna. Cole stopped in front of the glass and kept his voice level. "That man by the window is having a heart attack," he said. "How long has he been there?" Donna looked up at him, then past him at Earl, then back at her screen. "He's been triaged," she said. "He's in the queue. We are extremely short-staffed today, sir." "He is gray," Cole said. "His lips are going blue. He needs to be on a monitor right now, sir. Everyone in this waiting room believes their situation is the emergency." She said it the way a person says a sentence they have said 100 times. Smooth and worn flat. There is a process. If you are not his family, I am going to have to ask you to take a seat. Deef had not moved from the old man's side. He had lowered himself to the floor beside the wheelchair, not touching, just there, his body a long, dark line between Earl and the indifferent room. And he had begun a low sound that was not quite a growl, more like a hum pitched at the edge of hearing, the sound he made when he wanted Cole to come, and come now. Cole did not take a seat. He had learned, across years of disaster zones and base hospitals and the long, quiet wars that happen inside men after the loud ones end, that there is a difference between a system that is failing. He could forgive failing. Failing was floods and shortages and too few hands. What he was looking at in Donna's flat eyes and the guard's cold coffee and the two clerks who had not once raised their heads was something that had decided this old man could wait, and the deciding was the thing that turned the cold in Cole's chest into something with a temperature. He crouched beside the wheelchair so his eyes were level with Earl's. "Sir, can you hear me?" The old man's eyes found him slowly, swimming up from somewhere deep. "Came in," Earl said the words cost him. "Told them, hour ago, maybe more. What's your name?" "Earl. A breath. Earl. You drove yourself." The old man's mouth moved into something that wanted to be a smile and did not have the strength. "Faster," he said, "than the weight." Cole put 2 fingers against the inside of Earl's wrist. The pulse under them was fast and thin and wrong, skipping like a stone over water, and the skin was cold and damp. Deef pressed in closer, his shoulder against the old man's knee. Now holding still in the particular way he held still when a body was failing, and he had decided to guard it through, Cole stood. He turned back toward the glass, and this time he did not ask. "I'm a former Navy corpsman," he said, which was true in the way that mattered. He had carried that bag through more bad nights than he would ever count, and a Marine learns medicine the way he learns weather, because both can kill the men beside him. That man is in cardiac distress, and he has been sitting in your lobby for over an hour after telling your staff he had chest pain. You are going to bring a nurse and a crash cart to that window right now, or I am going to start talking very loudly to every person in this room about exactly what I am watching happen, and then I am going to call the local news and tell them too. Your choice. You have about 10 seconds before his choice gets made for him." Donna's face changed. Something behind her professional flatness flickered, and Cole watched her see it the way he was seeing it, watched the worn sentence fall away and the real picture come through. She picked up the phone, and her voice had dropped the smoothness. "I need a nurse to the front lobby now. Possible, MI. He's been waiting." A pause. "I know what the board says. Look at him now. What happened after that happened fast, the way these things do once the right person finally moves." A nurse came through the doors at a run, a young woman with her hair coming loose from its tie, and the moment she saw Earl, her face did the same thing Donna's had done, the flat falling away, the real coming through. A monitor, a cart, pressed, hands. Earl was through the doors and gone into the back, and Deef rose from the floor and watched the doors swing shut behind him and did not look away from them for a long time. Cole got his tetanus shot 2 hours later from a different nurse in a different room, and by then it was already too late for the hospital to pretend the afternoon had not happened, because Cole Brennan was not a man who let a thing like that go. Stay with this. It gets harder before it gets better, and the dog is right about more than one person in this building. The town of Cedar Falls sat in a long valley in the foothills, the kind of place where the mountains kept the weather close and the winters came early. Cole had landed there 8 months back without meaning to stay. He had been driving north with no destination, the way he had been driving for 3 years since he left the Corps, sleeping in the truck, taking work where his hands could find it, moving on before any place could become a place. His truck had thrown a water pump on the county road outside Cedar Falls in October, and a man named Hollis Vane had towed it in and fixed it for the cost of the part and a day of Cole's labor. And somehow October had become November, and November had become a winter. And the room above. Hollis's garage had stopped feeling temporary without Cole ever deciding to let it. He had not let it feel like home. That was a different thing, and Cole had been careful about it. He had learned that places disappeared too easily, that a man who let himself belong to a town was a man who could be hurt by it, and he had paid that price once already, in a way he did not talk about. So he stayed near the edges. He fixed fences and split wood and pulled engines and kept to himself, and the only living thing he let all the way in was the dog who had come home from the war with him when the men they served beside had not. Deef had been his partner downrange. Explosives detection mostly. The long, slow work of walking ahead of a column and trusting an animal's nose with the lives of everyone behind it. The dog had pulled Cole back from a roadside by the strap of his vest one afternoon 2 seconds before the world came apart, had stood over him in the dust with his ears ringing and 3 good men gone, and the Corps had let Cole take him when they both came out, because by then nobody could have separated them with anything short of a wall. Deef was the reason Cole was alive. Cole had spent every day since trying to be worth that. The morning after the hospital, Cole drove back into town because he could not let it sit. He had watched Earl wheel through those doors, gray and alone, and he had watched a room full of people decide an old soldier could wait, and the deciding kept turning over in him through the night like a stone in a boot. He went to the county clerk's office first, then to the small diner on Main where Hollis took his coffee, and he started doing the thing he had always been good at, which was asking quiet questions and listening to the answers under the answers. Earl, he learned, was known in Cedar Falls. Known, and in the way of small towns, slightly avoided. He had been a carpenter once, a good one, had built half the porches in the older part of town and the steeple railing on the Methodist church. But his wife had died 4 years back, and Earl had folded inward after that the way some men do, gone quiet and proud and alone out on his road 9 miles from anyone. He had a daughter somewhere far off who called on holidays. He paid his bills late, but he paid them. He was, the diner agreed, a stubborn old cuss who would not ask for help if his roof fell in, and that reputation had a way of becoming permission. A man who never asks is a man easy to stop offering. Hollis Vane slid into the booth across from Cole around 9, a broad, slow man of 60, with grease worked permanently into the creases of his hands, and a way of taking a long time to say short things. He had heard about the hospital already. Cedar Falls was that size. "You made some noise out there yesterday," Hollis said. "Old man was dying in their lobby," Cole said. "Somebody had to." Hollis turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table. "Earl," he said, "he framed my mother's kitchen. Oh, must be 30 years gone. Good with his hands. Hard to know." He was quiet a moment. They got him to the cath lab. Stent. He'll keep. Cole looked out the window at the gray street. "Thing is, Hollis, an hour. He told that desk he had chest pain, and they left him sitting an hour. That's not short-staffed. That's a choice somebody made about whose time was worth what. Hollis was quiet for a longer while. Then he said the thing that turned the whole story, the way the right, plain sentence from the right, plain man so often does. "He's not the first," Hollis said. "My cousin Wade took my aunt in last spring, chest pain, same as Earl. Sat 4 hours. She passed 2 days later. Family said the same thing you're saying now. Nobody listened to us either." He turned the cup again. "There's a pattern out there if a man went looking. Folks just don't go looking. They're grateful to have a hospital at all out here." That answer stayed in Cole's head longer than he expected. A pattern. He did not have proof of a pattern. He had one old man and one grieving family and a town's worth of half-swallowed grievances, and he knew better than most that grievance and proof were different animals. Yet Deef had turned toward Earl before Cole had seen a thing wrong, and Deef was right about people in a way Cole had stopped trying to explain to anyone, and now Hollis was telling him the dog might have turned toward something larger than one wheelchair. He went to see Earl that afternoon. The cardiac ward at Cedar Falls Regional was on the second floor, and the nurse at that desk, a steady woman in her 50s named Ruth Okafor, looked at Cole and the dog beside him and did not reach for the phone to call security the way the lobby would have. She looked at Deef a long moment, and Deef looked back at her. And then the dog did the thing that Cole had learned to read as the highest thing he gave, which was nothing at all. He held still. He was easy. Ruth Okafor was safe, and the dog had said so, and Cole trusted that more than he trusted most. Credentials. "He can come back," Ruth said, nodding at Deef. "Room 4, mister. Tibbets has not had a single visitor, and frankly, I think the dog will do him more good than I can." She paused and lowered her voice, and Cole understood that she had been waiting for someone to talk to. "You're the one from the lobby." "I am." "Good," she said simply. It needed doing. Earl looked smaller in the bed than he had in the wheelchair, propped up against the pillows with a line in his arm and the color come back into his face, and when Deef walked in and laid his chin on the edge of the mattress, the old man's hand came up and found the dog's head as if they had known each other. Something in Earl's face cracked and reset. He had been a man holding himself very still for a very long time, and a warm weight against his hand had reached in under all that holding. "They tell me you're the reason I'm breathing," Earl said. "You're the reason," Cole said. "You drove yourself in. That took something, took stupid." Earl's mouth did the thing again, the almost smile, stronger now. "Should have called the ambulance, didn't want the fuss, didn't want to be a bother." He said the word bother the way a man says a word he has used to flatten himself for years. Funny end up the biggest fuss in the building anyway. Cole pulled the chair to the bedside and sat. Deef settled against his boot, and over the next hour, in the slow, circling way the old man talked, the story came out, and it was worse than Hollis had guessed. Earl had been at Cedar Falls Regional before, 3 times in the last 2 years, for the heart that had finally caught up to him. And every time, he said, he had waited. Hours, once, most of a day. He had assumed it was just how it was now. The hospital stretched thin, an old man at the bottom of the list where he figured he belonged. The last visit, 8 months back, he had been sitting in that same lobby long enough to watch the shift change, and he had overheard 2 administrators by the vending machines talking about something they called the Q metrics, and about how the new ownership wanted the average wait times on the public board to look a certain way, and that the way you made the board look right was you logged the easy, fast cases first and let the complicated ones sit, because a complicated old man with no insurance to speak of and no family raising hell was a number that hurt your average if you took him in early. I didn't understand the half of it, Earl said, but I understood enough to know they'd looked at me and done the arithmetic. Old alone, cheap to ignore, he looked at his own hands on the blanket, the carpenter's hands gone thin. Man works his whole life, builds half this town with his hands, and he comes down to a number that makes their chart look bad. Cole sat with that. The cold in his chest had a name now, and the name was not failing. He filed it the way he filed everything, low and quiet, and he asked Earl a few careful questions, the names of the administrators if he had them, the year the ownership had changed, anything he had seen written down. Earl did not have much. He had an old man's memory of a lobby and a few overheard words. He had, though, given Cole the shape of the thing, and the shape was enough to start pulling on. Here is what no quiet man tells you about himself. Cole would not have said it aloud. The reason he could not let this go was not only the old man in the bed. It was that 3 years gone in a hospital on a base far from here. Cole had sat in a chair like this one, beside a man named Tomas, who had served under him, a kid really. 22 and torn up inside in ways the surgeons kept saying were stable until the night they were not. And Cole had been told to wait, had been told the kid was in the queue, had believed it, because believing it was easier than the alternative, and the kid had died at 4 in the morning in a hallway, because a bed that should have been his went to a colonel's son with a broken wrist. Cole had filed a complaint that went nowhere. He had carried Tomas the way he carried everything. And he had promised himself in the gray hour after that he would never again sit in a chair and wait while the system did arithmetic on a man's life. He had been keeping that promise by not staying anywhere long enough to have to. Deef had turned toward the wheelchair, and now Cole could not keep it any longer the way he had been keeping it. The work began the next morning, and it was patient work, the only kind Cole trusted. He did not storm the administration office. He had learned that storming a building only gives the building a reason to close its doors and call its lawyers. Instead, he did what he had done downrange, which was gather quietly and let the picture build itself until it was too clear to deny. He started with the families. Hollis gave him Wade's number, and Wade gave him 2 more, and within a week Cole had sat at 4 kitchen tables across the valley and listened to 4 versions of the same afternoon. An old woman with a stroke who sat 90 minutes while the swelling did its work. A retired mill hand with sepsis spreading up his arm, who was sent home twice before someone finally looked. Earl's chest pain, Wade's aunt. Every one of them old, every one of them poor, every one of them the kind of person a chart could afford to lose. None of them had insurance worth fighting over. All of them had then, in the cold language Earl had overheard, complicated cases that hurt the average. At each table, Deef did the same thing. He went in quiet, and he settled near whoever was carrying the most grief, the widow, the son who blamed himself, and he laid his weight against them, and the talking came easier with the dog there. People who had swallowed their anger for a year found they could say it to a man who had a dog that listened. Cole said little. He wrote things down. He kept every date, every name, every hour exact, because he knew that the difference between a grievance and a case was whether the numbers held still when you pushed on them. By the second week, he had something that was no longer a feeling. He had 11 families. He had a span of 2 years that lined up exactly with the change in ownership Earl had half remembered, and a trip to the county recorder's office confirmed it. The hospital had been bought out of local nonprofit hands by a management company 3 states away, a company that ran 24 rural hospitals and had a way. of buying them cheap, cutting them to the bone, and selling the wait time numbers to anyone who measured such things. Cole did not have the inside documents. He had the outside shape of them, and the outside shape was bad enough to make a man's hands go still. What he needed was someone inside, and that was where the work got dangerous. Because inside that building were people whose jobs depended on not seeing what Cole was seeing. Ruth Okafor found him before he found her. She came out to the truck in the parking lot one evening after her shift, still in her scrubs, her arms crossed against the cold, and she stood looking at Cole and the dog through the open window for a moment before she spoke. "You've been talking to families," she said. It was not a question. "I have. You should know they had a meeting about you upstairs." Management flew somebody in. Her jaw was tight. "They're calling you a disgruntled transient who's harassing patients. They've told the front desk to call the sheriff if you come back in." Cole nodded slowly. He had expected something like it. A system that has decided does not surrender quietly. "And you came out here to warn me." "I came out here," Ruth said, and her voice shook just slightly, the first crack he had seen in her steadiness, "because my mother died in that lobby 14 months ago, and I was working a double on the 4th floor and didn't even know she was downstairs until it was over. I have watched what they do to the slow cases. I have watched myself learn not to fight it because fighting it costs you your job, and then there's one less decent person in the building. I have been a coward in a place that taught me to be one." She wiped her face once hard with the back of her wrist. "I am done being a coward. Tell me what you need." Deef had risen in the truck cab and put his head out the window toward her, and he leaned, that slow, deliberate lean he gave to almost no one, his shoulder against her arm, and Ruth Okafor put her hand on the dog's head and held on like the railing on a stair. What she gave Cole over the following weeks was the inside of the shape. Not stolen documents. She was too careful and too principled for that, and Cole would not have asked. What she gave him was direction. She told him which public records to request and what to ask for by its proper name: the State Department of Health Complaint logs, the federal reporting that any hospital taking federal money has to file, the inspection reports that were public if you knew they existed. She told him the name of the metric the administrators chased, and the name of the regional director who flew in to chase it, a man named Garrett Pruitt, who wore good suits in a town that did not own many, and who had stood in the cardiac ward once and asked Ruth, looking at a dying man's chart, whether the case could be coded as a transfer to make the numbers cleaner. The families signed statements. Cole wrote each one plainly in the family's own words, dated and specific, and the families read them and signed them at their own kitchen tables. And something happened around those tables that Cole had not gone looking for and did not have a word for at first. Families began to know each other. Wade drove out to Earl's place to help him with the woodpile he could no longer split. The mill hand's daughter brought a casserole to the widow with the stroke. A thing that had been 11 separate griefs scattered across a valley became, over those weeks, something that gathered, the way water gathers, the way people gather when one person finally says out loud the thing they had all been carrying. They gathered more than once in the room above Hollis's garage. Cole had not invited it. It simply happened, the families coming by with what they had: a box of old hospital bills, a calendar with a date circled, a son's phone with a voice memo he had made in a waiting room out of helpless anger 2 years before. The room filled up with people. Cole had spent 8 months keeping at arm's length, and Deef moved among them, easy and glad. And Cole stood at the edge of it the way he always stood at the edge, until the night, Earl recovered now and ornery with it, looked across the crowded little room and said, "You planning to stand in the doorway your whole life, son? Cole, or you gonna come sit down with the people you brought together?" That hit Cole harder than he expected. He came and sat down. The thing they built was not a fight in a parking lot or a confrontation in an office. It was a record, and records are slow, and they are quiet, and they do not lose. Cole compiled the 11 statements, the public inspection reports that showed the staffing cuts and the citations the management company had collected at its other hospitals, the timeline of the ownership change laid against the timeline of the deaths and the long waits. He did not leak it to make a splash. He took it through the channels that were built to hold exactly this kind of weight: the State Department of Health, the federal agency that oversees hospitals taking federal money, which has the power to pull that money from a hospital that puts metrics over patients, and which takes very seriously a documented pattern of old and poor people left to wait. A reporter at the regional paper, 2 counties, over who had been trying to get inside that management company for a year and had never had a town willing to talk. The town was willing now. There was a day, late in it, when Garrett Pruitt came to the room above the garage himself. He came in a good suit and a rental car, and he came with the smooth, practiced warmth of a man who had talked his way out of worse, and he sat down across from Cole at Hollis's workbench, and he smiled the smile that did not reach his eyes. And he offered, in so many words, to make things right. There would be a fund, he said, for the affected families, a gesture of goodwill, improvements to the intake process already underway. He wanted Cole to know. No need for any of this to become, he said, adversarial. Adversarial. Deef had been lying by the door. When Pruitt began to talk, the dog rose and crossed the room and lay down again, directly between Pruitt and the rest of the families, facing the man in the suit, not growling, not bearing anything, simply there. A long, dark line of attention laid across the floor. Pruitt's eyes went to the dog and came back, and his smile held. But Cole saw the thing under it. The way he had seen the thing under Donna's flatness. And he understood that Deef had read this man the moment he walked in and had decided to stand between him and the people Cole had gathered. "I appreciate you driving out," Cole said. "I want to be clear so you don't waste another trip. This isn't about a fund. 11 families aren't looking for a check to be quiet. The records are already filed. The state has them. The federal office has them. The paper has them. There isn't a version of this where it goes away because you smiled at us in a garage." Pruitt's smile finally went, and what was under it was not menace exactly. It was something colder, the face of a man recalculating a number. "You understand," he said, "that this hospital is the only one within 40 miles. You understand that if the federal review goes against us, this management company will simply walk away and these people will have no hospital at all. Is that what you want for them? You want to be the man who closed the only hospital in the valley. It was a good threat. Cole had to give him that. It was aimed exactly at the soft place, the fear every one of these families carried that fighting the hospital might cost them the hospital. The room went very quiet. It was Earl Tibbets who answered from his chair by the wall, in the plain, flat voice of a man who had built half the porches in town with his own hands. "Mister," Earl said, "I sat in your lobby dying for an hour because your chart said I was worth less than a number. You didn't keep this hospital open for me. You kept it open for the number. If a company that does arithmetic on old men walks away, then it was never ours to lose. We'll get another. This town built itself once. It can build a hospital that remembers what it's for. Pruitt did not have an answer for that. There is no good answer to a man who has stopped being afraid of you. He gathered his good suit and his rental car, and he drove back to wherever men like him weighed out the weather and the records did the slow work records do. The Federal Review came in the spring when the snow was going off the foothills in long muddy patches, and the families had taken to gathering at Earl's place on Sundays because Earl had the biggest porch, the one he had built himself. The management company, faced with a documented pattern and the loss of its federal funding and a reporter who would not stop calling, did the thing such companies do. It did not stand and answer. It sold the hospital fast and quiet, back into local hands, a coalition of the county and the church, and a regional nonprofit that ran small hospitals the old way. And it folded its tents in Cedar Falls and moved on to the next cheap valley, the way Earl had said it would, the way water runs downhill to the next low place. Garrett Pruitt's name appeared in none of the reporting. Men like him are larger than their names, and they do not face the people they cost. The metric he chased was gone, though, and the board in the lobby that had measured the wrong thing came down, and Ruth Okafor was made head of nursing by the new local board, and the first thing she did was tear up the protocol that had taught her to let the slow cases sit. Earl lived. His heart held. End. He took up carpentry again in a small way, his hands steadier than the doctors had promised, and one of the things he built that spring was a long, low bench for the new hospital's lobby, oak, sanded smooth, with no plaque on it because Earl would not allow a plaque, set against the window where he had once sat dying so that no one waiting there would ever again have to wait standing or alone. He built it with Wade, and the millhand's daughter and two other people from the valley who had buried someone in that building, and they put it in on a gray morning, and Ruth Okafor cried when she saw it, and the dog walked the length of it once, sniffing, and lay down at the end of it in the warm spill of light from the window as if to test it, and found it good. Cole did not leave. He had been ready to. That was the truth he sat with on the porch at Earl's place one evening late, when the work was done and the records were filed and the thing was finished, and there was no longer any reason a man who did not stay anywhere had to stay. His truck ran fine. The road went north the way it always had. And he sat on the bench. Earl had not yet finished, the prototype of the one that would go in the lobby, and he felt the old pull to be gone before the place could become a place. And he found that for the first time in 3 years the pull was not there. Deef lay across his boots. The valley went blue and then dark. Lights came on in the houses scattered down the road, the houses of people whose names Cole now knew, whose kitchen tables he had sat at, whose griefs he had carried for a season and helped lay down. Earl came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him without a word, the way men sit who have stopped needing to fill the quiet. And they watched the lights, and the dog slept, and the cold came down off the mountains the way it always had. And, "You could stay, you know," Earl said finally. He did not look over. "Hollis says that room over his garage isn't doing anybody any good as storage, and I've got more porch than I've got years to sit on it." Cole was quiet a long time. Years of leaving had trained him to have an answer ready, the easy, gentle answer a man gives to keep a door from closing on his way through it. He reached for it, and it was not there. What was there instead was the bench under him that Earl's hands had made, and the dog across his boots who had turned toward a dying man in a cold lobby and started all of this, and the lights down the valley. And the plain, astonishing fact that he had spent 8 months keeping a town at arm's length, and the town had reached past his arm anyway and pulled him in. "Yeah," Cole said. I could. It was not much of a speech. Earl seemed to find it sufficient. He nodded once at the dark and drank his coffee, and after a while Deef lifted his head and looked at Cole the way he had looked at him on a road down range 1,000 years ago, checking the way he always checked. And Cole put his hand on the broad, warm skull, and the dog put his head back down, and that was the whole of it. A man and his dog, and a porch one of them had decided to call home. If you have watched this far, sit with it a moment before you go. You will meet people in your life who have learned to ask for nothing, who have folded themselves small so they will not be a bother, who have decided somewhere along the way that they are worth less than a number on someone else's chart. An old man in a lobby, a nurse who taught herself not to fight, a neighbor down the road you have stopped really seeing. They are waiting, most of them, the way Earl waited, quietly and alone and certain that no one is coming. You can be the one who walks through the doors. You do not need a uniform or a medal or a dog who reads a room before you do. You need only to refuse. Once, to look away, to cross a lobby when everyone else has decided to wait, to sit down at a table and listen until a grievance becomes a case, and a case becomes justice, and 11 scattered sorrows become a town that remembers what it is for. Goodness is not loud. It does not arrive in a good suit with a rehearsed smile. It shows up quietly, with patient hands, and it stays when staying is hard, and it refuses to do arithmetic on the worth of a human life. May God keep you and the people you love. May you never sit forgotten in a cold room. And may there always be someone, when your own strength fails, who walks through the doors and will not take a seat. Stay well and stay kind, and watch over the ones the world has decided it can afford to ignore.